In the peaceful town of San Martino, Italy, life moved quietly. Families gathered for meals, neighbors exchanged greetings, and the Bellini household seemed just like any other. But behind the closed doors of a modest suburban home, a storm of hidden despair was building, one that would erupt in a single night of unimaginable horror. A devoted wife, a bright young daughter, a son full of dreams for the future, and a father who, in the span of minutes, would tear it all apart. How could a man so trusted, so loved, turn into the destroyer of his own family? The answer lies deep within the shadows of mental illness, financial fear, and a plan no one saw coming. Tonight, we unravel the chilling truth behind the San Martino massacre. This is Twisted True Crime Stories. If real-life cases that challenge what we think we know about people fascinate you, tap subscribe and stay with us. This story unravels secrets that never should have seen the light of day. In the quiet town of San Martino, tucked among the familiar rhythms of everyday life, the Bellini family lived quietly, lovingly, a family much like any other. Isabella Romano, 56 years old, was the heart of the home. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name at the local bakery, who organized charity events, who offered a helping hand without ever asking for anything in return. Her friends often spoke of her warmth, the type of kindness that wasn't flashy but consistent, dependable. She gave love freely and built her world around nurturing those she cared for. Her daughter, Sofia Bellini, was at the very beginning of her journey, 16 years old, full of curiosity and deeply empathetic. Her dream was clear: to become a psychologist. Sofia wanted to understand the human mind, to help heal invisible wounds. At school, she was known for her thoughtfulness, often staying behind after class to help classmates who were struggling. Her teachers described her as a shining light, not just academically gifted, but kind-hearted in a way that left a mark on everyone she met. And anchoring this family was Isabella's mother, a 76-year-old woman whose life had been a tapestry of perseverance and quiet dignity. Having lived through decades of Italy's changing history, she carried with her the timeless wisdom of experience. Her presence in the Bellini household wasn't just out of necessity, it was a conscious choice, a bond that kept generations stitched tightly together. Family was everything to them. Sundays meant long, lingering meals with pasta made from scratch and stories passed around the table. Summers were filled with trips to the lakes nearby, laughter carrying across the water. Evenings often found them gathered together in the living room. Simple scenes of togetherness, homework spread across the table, Isabella reading quietly, the soft voice of Vittoria Romano sharing an old Italian proverb to end the day. Photographs captured these moments, Sophia beaming as she held up an award from school, Isabella posing proudly at community events, three generations standing together, strong and united. To their friends and neighbors, the Bellini household was a place where love was visible, not through grand gestures but through everyday kindnesses. A hug before leaving for school, a homemade meal waiting after a long day, an unwavering sense of belonging. Their lives, like so many others, were built on dreams shared across generations. Dreams that, in an instant, would be stolen away. They were not just names in a headline. They were love, ambition, and resilience brought to life. May 3rd, 2022. In San Martino, a small, close-knit town tucked away in Italy's Lombardy region, the day had unfolded like any other. In the Bellini home, Isabella prepared dinner, humming softly in the kitchen. The aroma of fresh pasta filled the air. Sophia, bright and full of energy, sat at the dining table scrolling through her phone, chatting about her dreams of traveling abroad after graduation. Upstairs, Vittoria Romano rested, her window cracked open to let the spring breeze in. She had lived many seasons in San Martino, but none as heavy as this one would soon become. As evening descended, the streets outside grew quieter. Street lights blinked on one by one, painting long golden pools onto the empty sidewalks. A feeling of deep, almost unnatural stillness settled over the neighborhood, a silence that no one thought to question. Inside the house, subtle cracks were beginning to show. Alessandro Bellini, the father and husband everyone knew as calm, responsible, and devoted, sat alone in the study. His hands shook slightly as he reviewed the bills spread out across the desk. Months of financial strain, mounting debts, and a profound sense of hopelessness had hollowed him from the inside out. Unknown to his family, unknown even to his closest friends, Alessandro's mind had traveled to a dark and desperate place. Earlier that day, he had made small but telling decisions. He had canceled a planned lunch with a friend. He had quietly withdrawn a small sum of money from their joint account. He had moved certain belongings, cherished photos, wedding keepsakes, into a box and locked it away. These actions would later stand out as grim signposts to a tragedy no one could have foreseen. After dinner, the family settled into their usual routines. Isabella read a book on the sofa. Sophia video called a friend, laughing freely. Vittoria Romano dozed gently in her armchair. It was a picture of peace. But peace, as they would soon discover, can sometimes be the cruelest illusion of all. Sometime after midnight, the nightmare unfolded. Neighbors would later report hearing muffled noises, a thud, a faint cry, but no one raised an alarm. San Martino was the kind of town where terrible things simply didn't happen. Inside the Bellini house, horror was taking shape. A father, once protector, now destroyer, took a kitchen knife and walked room to room. Methodical, detached. In mere minutes, the family he had once vowed to love and protect lay still. Later, Alessandro would say he acted out of love. Twisted, unrecognizable love. A desire, he claimed, to spare them all from financial ruin and a future filled with suffering. But no rationalization could ever erase what was lost that night. 3 generations, wiped out in an unspeakable act of betrayal. The day everything changed was not announced with sirens or screams. It was a quiet, almost invisible collapse. The final breaking point of a man overwhelmed by his demons. The morning of May 4th, 2022, began like any other for the quiet neighborhood in Via Torino, San Martino. But that peace was shattered just after 7 a.m., when a neighbor noticed something strange. Sounds she could not quite explain coming from the Bellini residence. Moments later, an eerie silence fell over the house. Then came the unmistakable signs of distress. Muffled cries, the slam of a door, the high-pitched whine of emergency alarms set off inside. Concerned, the neighbor called emergency services, unsure what was happening, but certain that something was very wrong. Within minutes, the first patrol car arrived. The officers approached cautiously. The Bellini home, once so welcoming, now stood eerily still, its windows drawn, the front door slightly ajar. The lead officer knocked. No answer. A second knock. Nothing but stillness. With backup en route and concerns mounting, they made the decision to enter. What they found inside would stay with them for the rest of their careers. In the living room, they discovered Isabella and Vittoria Romano, both lying motionless, clear signs of extreme violence marking the scene. Upstairs, the body of young Sophia was found in her bedroom, her life taken before she could even glimpse adulthood. Among the devastation, there was something unexpected, a survivor. Luca Bellini, Alessandro's adult son, was found critically injured, clinging to life. He had been attacked too, but somehow, against all odds, he was still breathing. His rescue became an immediate priority. Paramedics rushed him to the nearest hospital under critical care, while investigators sealed the home as a crime scene. As word spread, neighbors gathered at the fringes of the street, exchanging fearful whispers. This was San Martino. Nothing like this ever happened here. Early theories began to circulate among law enforcement. Was this a violent robbery gone wrong? A revenge attack fueled by some undisclosed grudge? Or something far more random? A break-in that spiraled into chaos? The positioning of the bodies, however, told a different story. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no ransacked rooms, no valuables taken. Everything remained intact. Everything except the family itself. The evidence began pointing inward, not outward. But detectives, cautious not to rush judgment, still had to consider every possibility. Italy had seen its share of organized crime in the past. Could this have been a message sent by hidden hands? A debt collected in blood? Rumors stirred around San Martino as local media picked up the story. Was Alessandro somehow involved in financial disputes? Had he fallen into debt with the wrong people? Investigators left no stone unturned. They interviewed neighbors, pieced together phone records, traced financial transactions. Forensics teams worked through every inch of the house, documenting blood patterns, collecting fingerprints, searching for any shred of clarity. Meanwhile, Luca Bellini fought for his life in a sterile hospital room, the only person who might hold the key to understanding what had truly happened inside those walls. And as the hours passed, the focus of the investigation began to narrow. A chilling pattern started to emerge, hinting that the truth would not be found outside the Bellini home, but within it. As forensic teams combed through the shattered remains of the Bellini household, a grim realization dawned. There was no forced entry, no shattered glass, no broken locks, no clear sign that an intruder had ever breached their home. Everything inside suggested familiarity, a terrible act carried out by someone the family had allowed to remain close, someone they trusted without question. A growing unease spread among the investigators, and their suspicion turned toward the one family member who was missing: Alessandro Bellini, the husband, the father. Hours after the discovery, he was located, not hiding, not fleeing, but sitting silently in his car parked near a hotel several towns away, dazed, blood still staining his clothes. When approached, Alessandro offered no resistance. His gaze was vacant, his demeanor oddly calm. He was taken into custody without incident. In the sterile walls of the police station, investigators began their questioning carefully, piecing together a man who no longer seemed tethered to reality. At first, he mumbled incoherently, speaking about financial burdens, stress, and the crushing weight of failure. Then, almost without prompting, Alessandro Bellini confessed. In a chilling, flat voice, he admitted to the murders of his wife, Isabella, his daughter, Sofia, and his mother-in-law. He detailed how, in the stillness of night, he moved from room to room. He told them how he used a hammer and a knife, striking swiftly, ensuring that none would survive. His reasoning was warped, but clear in his mind. He claimed he had wanted to spare them from what he saw as a bleak future. His own mounting debts, his dwindling business, his faltering mental health. He saw no escape. And instead of seeking help, instead of facing the truth, he chose devastation. Investigators, trained to hear confessions without emotion, found themselves struggling to maintain composure. It wasn't just the act that horrified them. It was the cold, calculated way Alessandro described extinguishing the lives of those who loved him most. Details emerged about the family's final days. How Isabella had encouraged Alessandro to seek counseling. How Sofia had planned her summer, eager for freedom after high school. How Vittoria Romano had offered to help financially, sensing her son-in-law's growing strain. None of it mattered to Alessandro in those final hours. In his distorted mind, he had already made his decision. The investigation confirmed that the murders had been premeditated, at least in part. Alessandro had brought the weapons into the home that night with purpose. He waited until the house was quiet, until his victims were most vulnerable. Forensic analysis revealed no signs of struggle. It was likely they never even saw the attacks coming. Police pieced together a brutal, efficient timeline. First, he attacked Isabella in the master bedroom. Next, he moved to his daughter's room, ending her young life as she slept. Finally, he confronted Vittoria Romano, silencing her before she could understand what was happening. Luca Bellini, the son who survived, was attacked last. Perhaps Alessandro hesitated. Perhaps in those brief, chaotic seconds, the horror of what he was doing finally broke through. We will never fully know. But Luca Bellini survived long enough to call for help, long enough to later provide testimony that would confirm every chilling detail. As investigators cataloged the forensic evidence, the blood patterns, the fingerprints, the trajectory of the blows, the full scale of Alessandro's betrayal became undeniable. The community of San Martino, upon hearing the confession, plunged into shock. How could a man once seen cheering for his daughter at school events, a man laughing with neighbors over coffee, become capable of such an atrocity? It was a question that no forensic report, no confession, no psychiatric evaluation could ever truly answer. In the end, the simplest and most horrifying truth remained. The man they loved and trusted most had become their executioner. In the aftermath of the confessions, the task facing authorities grew even more complex. It wasn't enough to know what Alessandro Bellini had done. Now they had to understand why. Forensic psychologists were brought in to conduct intensive evaluations. What emerged was a chilling portrait of a man crumbling under the weight of a world he no longer believed he could control. Alessandro had long maintained an image of stability, an architect with a thriving practice, a proud family man in a close-knit town. But behind closed doors, that carefully constructed reality had been eroding for years. Investigators uncovered financial records that told a different story. Mounting debts, projects that collapsed during the COVID-19 pandemic, clients withdrawing, a steady, relentless decline in income, and with it, a growing sense of shame. Alessandro feared losing everything, not just money, but the respect of his family and community. According to psychiatric reports later presented in court, Alessandro exhibited signs of a narcissistic collapse, a psychological phenomenon where individuals who have built their identity around external success cannot bear the collapse of that image. To admit failure would have shattered the core of who he believed himself to be. Instead of reaching out for help, Alessandro retreated into isolation. Friends reported that in the months before the tragedy, he had become increasingly withdrawn. He spent long hours locked in his home office. Small irritations turned into explosive arguments with his wife. He grew paranoid, convinced that bankruptcy would not just ruin him, but shame his entire family. The financial investigation revealed a harrowing detail. In the days leading up to the murders, Alessandro had meticulously planned. He had canceled certain client meetings, paid off small debts with the last of his savings, perhaps a final act of desperation to preserve his image. And most disturbingly, a calendar found in his home office had certain days ominously marked off. The days leading to May 4th, 2022. A handwritten note tucked inside a drawer read simply, "They don't deserve to suffer what is coming." Investigators determined that the act was premeditated, a calculated decision wrapped in distorted logic. Alessandro's motive, as twisted as it was, appeared rooted in a delusion of mercy. In his mind, ending their lives spared them from disgrace and financial ruin. It was not rage that fueled his actions. It was despair, reframed through the warped lens of a man no longer tethered to reality. After the murders, Alessandro made a half-hearted attempt to take his own life. He inflicted shallow wounds upon himself, a gesture that suggested not true suicidal intent, but rather another cry from a man consumed by inner chaos. Medical evaluations later confirmed this. Alessandro was deemed psychologically unstable, but legally competent to stand trial. He understood right from wrong. He understood the consequences of his actions. And yet he chose to carry them out anyway. Court documents would later reveal a haunting final pattern. Alessandro didn't act in a moment of explosive rage. He moved with eerie calm through the house that night. He struck methodically. He checked to ensure there were no signs of survival. He gathered what little he could carry, his wallet, a few belongings, and left, alone. Not once, investigators noted, did he call for help. Not once did he express immediate regret. His confession came later, only when escape was no longer an option. As the full scope of Alessandro's psychological unraveling became public, San Martino faced a sobering truth. Sometimes the deepest darkness grows not from hatred, but from desperation, shame, and unchecked isolation. And sometimes those closest to us, those we trust most, can hide the most fragile, dangerous cracks beneath the surface. As the investigation concluded and the full horror of the San Martino murders became public, the Italian justice system prepared for one of the most emotionally charged trials in recent memory. In the small town where everyone knew the Bellini family, the shock still lingered. Yet when the trial of Alessandro Bellini officially began at the court of Busto Arsizio, it wasn't just a local matter. News crews descended from across Italy. Major newspapers and television outlets followed every moment. To many it was unfathomable. How could a father, a husband, the very foundation of a family, become the architect of such devastation? The courtroom was packed. Rows of journalists lined the benches, scribbling notes furiously. Cameras were barred from filming inside, but courtroom sketches captured the somber atmosphere. Alessandro sat quietly, heavily guarded, wearing a simple gray suit that hung loosely on his frame. Observers noted his detached demeanor. He seldom looked up, rarely showed emotion. Not remorse, not anger, nothing. Over the course of the proceedings, the prosecution presented a meticulous timeline. Step by step, they reconstructed how Alessandro had planned the murders over several days, carefully masking his intentions until it was too late. Financial experts testified about his growing insolvency. Forensic psychologists explained his mental deterioration, diagnosing him with depressive psychosis but asserting that he had retained full awareness of his actions. The most harrowing moments came when those closest to the family took the stand. Neighbors described a family once full of laughter and warmth, now silenced forever. Friends of Sophia, the young daughter, spoke about her kindness, her dreams of becoming a psychologist, dreams now cruelly extinguished. A surviving relative, voice trembling, recalled the phone call that shattered their world. The raw grief in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Throughout it all, Alessandro remained emotionless. No tears, no visible regret. When asked by the judge if he wished to make a statement, Alessandro simply muttered, "I don't deserve forgiveness." It was a rare moment of acknowledgement, but it rang hollow in a room full of shattered lives. After weeks of emotional testimony, the trial reached its inevitable conclusion. The judge, citing the brutal premeditation of the crimes, the complete betrayal of familial trust, and the devastating emotional toll on the surviving relatives, delivered the sentence: life imprisonment for triple homicide. There would be no possibility of parole, no future chance of freedom. As the sentence was read aloud, quiet sobs broke out among the spectators. Friends of the family held each other for support. A single wrenching cry echoed through the room, a mother mourning a daughter, a family mourning its own destruction. Alessandro was led away in silence, never once glancing back at the lives he had destroyed. Outside the courthouse, a small group of residents gathered in vigil. Candles were lit. Photos of Isabella, Sofia, and Vittoria Romano were placed gently along the steps. The trial may have ended, but the true sentence, the absence, the grief, the questions with no answers, would last far longer for those left behind. And in San Martino, a wound would remain, a scar across a community that once believed such horror was unthinkable within their midst. The trial had ended. The sentence had been delivered. Yet for the small town of San Martino, closure remained a distant dream. In the days following the conviction of Alessandro Bellini, an overwhelming sadness blanketed the community. What was once a peaceful suburban corner of northern Italy had become synonymous with tragedy. Outside the family home, now sealed off by authorities, makeshift memorials began to appear. Flowers were left in colorful bunches. Candles flickered in the night breeze. Handwritten notes, trembling and tear-stained, expressed a collective grief that words could scarcely contain. A framed photo of Isabella, Sofia, and Vittoria Romano rested on the front steps. Three smiling faces frozen in time, the same steps where the unimaginable had unfolded. Vigils were held throughout San Martino and neighboring towns. People gathered in town squares, churches, and schoolyards, holding candles high into the night sky. Students who had known Sofia at the Istituto Falcone recounted her kindness, her dreams of becoming a psychologist to help others. Teachers wept openly, unable to understand how such light had been extinguished so violently. The pain of the Bellini family rippled outward, touching everyone who heard their story. In a heartfelt public statement, surviving relatives shared these words: "We lost everything that night, our joy, our future, our trust. No explanation will ever make sense. We ask for privacy as we try to rebuild shattered pieces of our lives." Their words captured a sorrow too deep for easy comprehension, a grief that would never fully heal. But amid the heartbreak, uncomfortable questions began to surface. How could this have happened without warning? Had there been signs that were overlooked? Subtle cries for help that no one recognized? Mental health professionals spoke out in the media, emphasizing the dangers of untreated psychological decline, especially when combined with economic ruin and familial pressures. In small, tightly knit communities like San Martino, there is often a heavy stigma around seeking help for mental health struggles. Problems are kept behind closed doors. Shame outweighs the need for support. And so silent suffering festers until it erupts. In the aftermath of the San Martino massacre, calls for better mental health awareness and services grew louder. Advocacy groups pushed for stronger local programs, early intervention initiatives, school-based counseling services, anonymous hotlines. Public officials acknowledged that mental health must no longer be a hidden crisis. Across Italy, the tragedy sparked broader conversations about how financial pressures, untreated depression, and isolation can corrode even the strongest familial bonds. What remains perhaps most haunting about the San Martino case is that, to the outside world, the Bellini family appeared whole, loving, stable, and yet behind that facade, a slow collapse was unfolding. A collapse no one saw clearly until it was far too late. As weeks turned into months, the community tried to heal. The home where the murders occurred remained empty, a dark silhouette against an otherwise cheerful neighborhood. Plans were discussed to tear it down. Some felt it too painful a reminder. Others insisted it should remain, a silent testament to the lives lost and the warning left behind. But regardless of what would happen to the house, one truth had become tragically evident. When we ignore the quiet suffering of those around us, when we dismiss signs of collapse as momentary stress, we risk allowing sorrow to turn into catastrophe. The faces of Isabella, Sofia, and Vittoria Romano live on, not just as victims of an unspeakable crime, but as permanent reminders of what is lost when compassion comes too late. As the dust settles over San Martino, one truth lingers like a chill in the evening air. The horror of this tragedy lies not just in the lives that were so brutally taken, not only in the final moments of fear and betrayal suffered by Isabella, Sofia, and Vittoria Romano, but in something far quieter and far more insidious: silence. The silence of mounting debts hidden behind closed doors. The silence of mental anguish that went unspoken, untreated, unseen. The silence of small-town traditions where asking for help can feel like admitting failure. It is this silence, thick, suffocating, that allowed the darkness to grow, unchecked, until it consumed an entire family. And so we are left to ask the questions that have no easy answers. Could anyone have seen the warning signs? Could a kind word, a helping hand, or a courageous intervention have changed the course of that deadly night? Or was this tragedy, in the end, the result of fractures too deep and too hidden for even the closest loved ones to repair? These are questions that haunt San Martino still. They are questions that should haunt us all, because for every headline-grabbing tragedy like this, there are countless others, quieter and visible, taking root in homes across every city, every town, every neighborhood. If there is anything to be learned from the devastating loss of Isabella, Sofia, and Vittoria Romano, it is this: we must learn to hear the silence. We must learn to see what is hidden, and we must find the courage to act before sorrow becomes irreversible. Thank you for walking through this painful story with us today. If you found this story moving, if it stirred something inside you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. And if you believe in uncovering the human stories behind the headlines, subscribe to our channel for more true crime documentaries crafted with care and respect. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and never be afraid to listen.